Hello, good morning. My name is Behnaz Minuifard, and I am a research fellow at Ka Foscari University, and also I am collaborating with the Waterlands project at this university. And today I'm glad to moderate this webinar, which is the third and the last session of the seminar series. This series of seminars resulted from the collaboration between Ka Foscari University and Fondazione Enrico Mattei FIM, which is also known as the Waterlands Project and the research program on climate change adaptation at Venice. So as a fitting closure to this series, we are privileged to have Professor Carlo Giapponi join us. Professor Giapponi holds the position of Professor of Environmental and Applied Economics at Ka Foscari University and also coordinates the Adapt Venice program at FIM. With over 300 publications to his credit, he is widely recognized in national and international academic circles. He's a leading figure in sustainability science and global change risk and adaptation. His research is marked by a focus on valuation methods, scenario analysis, and the integrated assessment of natural resources. His significant methodological contributions lie in disciplinary integration, characterized by the development of original methods, dynamic and spatial models, and tools adapted to support decisions for both private companies and public institutions. Today, we have invited him to shed light on, as you can see, Venice economic activities and the MoSE system, a long-term cost-benefit analysis, which also I had this opportunity to be one of the co-authors of this paper. But before going to the presentation, I'd like to remind our audience that we'll have a dedicated Q&A session following his presentation. So if you have any burning questions or points of clarification that arise during his presentation, please feel free to type them into the chat, and we'll do our best to address them at the end of the presentation. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Giapponi to the virtual stage. I'm sure that he has invaluable insights to share with us. Professor Giapponi, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Behnaz, very much. It's a nice opportunity to be here today all together and present this long story about our study on the MoSE system, and in particular our attempt to carry out a long-term cost-benefit analysis of the system. So the summary of this webinar is in front of you now. We start with a few words about Venice and its lagoon for those that are not familiar with this area, and I will spend some words about the evolution of the social and ecological system of the lagoon of Venice and the city of Venice itself, and then I will move into the details of this long-term cost-benefit analysis we carried out, taking global drivers into consideration, and as you can imagine, sea level rise in particular, trying to estimate the local impacts. I will then introduce the system dynamic model that we designed and developed and implemented, and then I will move to share with you some results, most important results, and ending up with some concluding remarks. So let's start with the first section about the evolution of the social ecosystem. So here we have some facts and figures about the lagoon of Venice and the city. So the city itself, as you can see, is less than 7 square kilometers. I will use the pointer to indicate where we are for those that are not familiar with this place. So here is the city of Venice, more or less in the middle of the lagoon. The population is decreasing, as it's now below 50,000, even below 48,000 these days. The lagoon has a, excuse me, a surface area of around 550 square kilometers. So this area here. Here is the mainland and here is the Adriatic Sea. So the surface area of the lagoon open to tide is 420 kilometers because, as you can see, we have some sort of purple areas here that are fish farms and are separated then from open lagoon and tides. Importantly, we have still some 40 square kilometers of salt marshes that you can see in this greenish color. There were much more in the past. 1 century ago, there were at least 3 times more. And centuries ago, most of the lagoon was covered by salt marshes. So this is simply to give an idea of how much the lagoon has been evolving over time. And what is very important for us today is that there are substantial exchanges of water between the sea and the lagoon through these 3 outlets or inlets in the order of 385 million cubic meters per day. So morphological evolution of the lagoon taken from this publication by Luigi Dal Paus, who made an attempt to provide us with a series of pictures of the lagoon and how it evolved over time. Here we are at the beginning of the 19th century. What I drive your attention to is that we had a series of inlets, more than the 3 that I mentioned before, here at Treporti, Sant'Erasmo, and again on the other side of Sant'Erasmo here, the Lido connection to the sea. And what is also quite evident is that accessing to the lagoon was quite challenging because of shallow waters and really was quite difficult to navigate. And in fact, this is the strategic role that the lagoon has played for the city for many centuries, protecting the city from anyone who wanted to attack in case the city. So this was the situation. You see the vast extension of the salt marshes. Now, if we go one step ahead by 1 century, and we go to the at the beginning of the 20th century, many things have changed. You see that we have, maybe you can see there are jetties, new jetties that have been built here. And in fact, the jetties were meant to facilitate the exchange of water and the cleaning, so to say, of the canals to reach the city. Very importantly, at the beginning of the 20th century, we already had the bridge connecting the city to the mainland, and we had the port activities more or less around the city in this area here. If we jump ahead to the beginning of the 21st century, many things have changed indeed. Here part of the lagoon simply disappeared because here one of the largest industrial plants in Europe was developed at the beginning of the 20th century. And in order to connect these new harbor and port to the open sea, a canal was designed and digged. And this is the Canale Malamocco Marghera that, as you can see, is completely different. Is a sort of straight line that enters into the lagoon. So quite here, for example, thanks to the jetties, we have a sort of new peninsula, and we have consolidated only these 3 inlets and outlets to the lagoon, which is important because more recently, 2003, by the way, was the starting really of the activities for building this MoSE system. The MoSE system is made by a series of more than 70 modules of a mobile barrier that separates the lagoon from the sea. So the lagoon inside, the sea outside, and these are sort of tanks that are filled of water when there is no need to close the MoSE itself. When instead we expect a high tide, we pump water out of these sort of tanks, and since they are linked here by hinges, they raise up, being empty of water and filled by air, and they separate the lagoon from the sea. So this is the system on which we are interested in today, and a long process to build it. Eventually, on the 3rd of October 2020, for the first time, the MoSE was closed, and this is a picture taken showing at that time, showing the sea separated from the lagoon that we see inside at the lower elevation. Very interestingly, we have also a satellite picture that shows the three inlets. You see that at the time of the satellite picture, the gates, the barriers were still closed in Chioggia, and they were just being opened in Malamocco and Lido, and you can see from the colors of the water that still there are some sediments, some discontinuities in the flow. So this was quite an important event for the city of Venice, and these are the monitoring taken from the sea. So the water levels in the sea above under 20 centimeters, and the water levels within the lagoon during the closure of the MoSE. So this is what happened for the first time on the 3rd of October, and we are now on the order of 80 closures that have been implemented for experimental purposes, and the majority for really protecting the city from high tides. So this is, as I said, the context which we are interested in. And now let's look at our work, starting from the global drivers that act locally in this area. And global change here means, first of all, sea level rise. So this graph is taken from a publication by Lionello and collaborators that downscaled the global scenarios of sea level rise for the upper Adriatic Sea. So as you can see, there is a high uncertainty about the future sea level rise. Look at the red and the blue curves in particular, with the uncertainty around them, depending on the climate change scenario. So the RCP 2.6 is a very optimistic scenario about our capability to mitigate climate change today and in the future. RCP 8.5 is a rather pessimistic scenario. Of course, pessimism drives us to estimate much higher increase of relative sea level rise in the future. We say relative, by the way, because not only we have sea level rise, but also we have subsidence of the land due to the compaction of geological layers. What is also quite important here is that this phenomenon is accelerating, with estimation of 15 millimeters, 1.5 centimeters per year at the end of the century in the pessimistic scenario. But also in blue, we have here these authors that made estimations of the amount of time, so the annual persistence of the sea level above the present safeguard level of 110 centimeters. So you see only 2-3 weeks if we are more than optimistic, but almost the whole year if we are more than pessimistic. And please note that 110 centimeters is also the threshold that is set for the activation of the MoSE. So what this graph immediately shows is that in a very pessimistic scenario, the lagoon should simply close, permanently closed. and separated from the sea. So it is quite important and quite interesting to explore this time frame and see how things may evolve over time. And this is what we try to do. In particular, what we wanted to do was to analyze how MoSE costs and benefits may evolve and accumulate until the end of the century under two relative sea level rise scenarios that I showed you before. And we wanted also to answer three specific questions, research questions. The first is the obvious one. How do the benefit of the city compare to the investments and operating cost of the MoSE system? The second is also quite interesting and was part of the debate that we observed first day of the activation of the MoSE. And the problem is that when we close the MoSE, the port of Venice is disconnected from the sea, so it becomes a regulated port. And so we have revenues that are lost by the port because of a limited operation of the port itself. The third question was to look into the future and see if we can see some possibilities of tipping points in MoSE functioning, future MoSE function, because of excessive number of closures due to sea level rise. Please remember that at the time of MoSE design, what was declared in the design of the MoSE was an expected number of closures in the order of 2-5 per year. We are now around 10,000 more than this. So we are more in the order of more than 20 times the MoSE has been closed during the last 3 years. So important question because of the relevance of the city, because of the relevance of the environment, and the relevance of the investment to build the MoSE itself. So let's look at the model, how we opted for a system dynamics model. System dynamics, as you will see also in a picture in a minute, it's a rather complex model made of 3 main modules. A module for the simulating and replicating the MoSE management, a module to simulate the impacts on the city, and another module to simulate the impacts on the port. In turn, the city module is articulated further into 3 main modules, a module to simulate the impact on tourism, so tourists that will not show up because of high tides or can show up because thanks to the MoSE. Buildings, commercial and residential buildings being affected by high tides and therefore being degraded and requiring more and more restoration into the future, and other costs for the populations, as we will see if we have time. The MoSE management module operates by reading, as we say, a time series of lagoon water levels that we provide as input, where we have 2 daily maximum and 2 daily minimum values, as it happens, so approximately with a cycle of 6 hours. As I said, in order to explore these 2 scenarios, we have generated 2 time series, which are built by resampling the historical records, segmented into 26 annual records that we have resampled randomly to generate 2 78 years time series from 2021 to 2100. And on these time series, we have superimposed the trends of sea level rise that we have seen in the previous chart. The model works by mimicking the current decision process. So the model is informed by a tide forecast signal that is calculated by applying a forecast error to the time series of the water levels that I have described before. this is a realistic situation because, in fact, what we know is that the current precision accuracy of the tide forecast service is of this order of magnitude. So the error could be plus minus within plus minus 20 centimeters range. So the forecast is then compared with the predefined threshold level, which is officially being defined at under 10 centimeters. So, and if the forecast, not the actual level, but the forecast exceeds the level, the threshold level, the MoSE is activated. And we have made simulations ranging from 90 to 130 centimeters. So something that is quite difficult to see, but just to give you simply a flavor, a picture of the complexity and the number of variables better of our model is this picture that is in fact the interface of the Venice software that we used for developing the model itself. And we have, as you can see, the building part here, the other cost here, the tourism part here, the MoSE activation part here with the calculation of cost and benefit. These stocks are where we accumulate the cost and the benefit, and here are different types of vessels that reach the lagoon, that may reach the lagoon. I will zoom a little bit into this in a minute. So MoSE cost benefit analysis. So we are here now in the part where we calculate direct costs that are associated with the city and the port economic activities. We left out of our considerations the indirect effects on the broader economic system, but also the impacts on lagoons ecosystem that are not considered so far. In practice, at each time step, we look at the level of the water and we calculate the city potential cost, if any. In the case we go above the threshold with the forecast, we activate the MoSE, as I said, so we calculate now the city residual costs, because some part of the city are even lower than the threshold and are still affected. And these residual costs are subtracted to the potential cost that we are calculating in each time step, and we estimate the avoided damages, which is in practice the benefit for the city. We take into account the MoSE operation cost. Unfortunately, there is also here a lot of uncertainty. We don't know how much the cost is and will be. And here again, with the sensitivity analysis, we simulated cost in between 30 and 300,000 euros per closure. And then we calculated the lost revenues to the port. Here we have a rather complex procedure that takes into account the statistics of the number of vessels reaching the port and operating in the port of Venice in the recent past. And we added a probabilistic consideration concerning the possibility of these vessels to redirect to other ports if they know about the possibility of closure. And also we took into account the memory effect of those that came, that had to wait outside maybe for some hours and maybe can consider not to return to this port. This was done by taking advantage of a recent study of the port authority. In all the other cases, the potential costs are simply added to actual cost and no revenue losses are calculated for the port. So this is the picture that I mentioned with some zoom. We can return on this if questions arise from this, and these are the various modules that I mentioned. But let's move to the results because we are running long with time. Here is our simulation of the Acqua Grande event of the 12th, which started on the 12th of November, 4 events above under 40 centimeters, and this is the calculations that we had in the order of 80, 90 million euros, which is comparable to the official statistics of the municipal administration, which is a sort of a validation for us. So in the long term, what we can observe, look at, for example, the purple line. The purple line shows what happens in a pessimistic scenario, 8.5, and with the low activation level, under 10 centimeters, which is actually the current one. So you see that at the end of the century, we could even be in the order of magnitude of 5,000 hours of closure per year, sorry, knowing that 1 year has only 8,700 hours. So most of the year, the MoSE being closed in accordance with what we have seen also before. But other curves are possible in particular if we are optimistic with the RCP 2.6, the yellow line, but also if we change the activation level. You see that even in the pessimistic scenario, the red line is much lower, and in particular, all these other lines are very low for most of the century, and then they ramp up. A very important message that emerged from our simulations. But in terms of costs and benefits, as you can see, actually on the left, we have the optimistic scenario. The optimistic scenario, look at the green line, shows that the avoided costs are still significant in the order of, as you can see, 25 billion euros. Much bigger is the avoided cost and therefore the benefits that we have in a pessimistic 8.5 scenario, which is, as you can see, in the order of 112 billion euros. Remember that the investment cost is in the order of 7 billion euros. And what we see is, if we look at this orange line, the port cost, in fact, have a completely different order of magnitude, so they are much lower. So high benefits for the city, limited damages for the cost in terms of overall value. Of course, these are not discounted. You can take, you can apply a discount rate, and this discount rate, if we apply a 3–4% discount rate, and in an optimistic scenario, the benefit could get close to the investment cost. But this is a matter of discussion, and we can discuss it if we have time. So sensitivity analysis, very quickly. Sensitivity analysis of the cost per closure shows that this is not relevant. Okay, so whatever the cost will be within a reasonable range between 30 and 300,000 K. Of course, the order of magnitude changes because of the scenario, but it doesn't really change. The spread of the curves is very, very limited. What in fact changes a lot is the curve, how the curve, they do change a lot when we move, when we switch from lower to higher closure height, so the thresholds. Both the city benefits and the port damages, the lost revenues, they change dramatically depending on these threshold, which appears as a crucial element for discussion that is to be brought to the attention of decision maker more than what it is now. But so these are, in a few words, the main results. I will move to the conclusions, to the main messages, and then I will leave the floor to your questions. So what are the main concluding remarks that we can take out of this exercise? Our study, first of all, as I think I have already shown, shows that the benefit of the MoSE system clearly outweigh the cost in terms of direct impacts on the city economy. The estimated revenue losses for the port are still relevant, but are at least one order of magnitude lower than the benefits to the city. So this is evident, but we have to consider that in the long term, medium to long term, the sustainability of a regulated port may emerge as an issue. People, I mean, vessels will simply decide to go elsewhere. even if there is a relatively low probability of finding the gate closed. Then another important point is that although the economic performance is positive and robust, these concerns indeed emerge and rise from ramping number of closures due to relative sea level rise in the future and before the end of the century. So tipping points, can we see tipping points? So it's difficult to see tipping points because unfortunately we do not know what is the range of operation in terms of maximum number of closures per year or in total, for example. This is unknown, unfortunately, but tipping points may in fact appear after the mid of the 21st century, as we have shown, in particular with pessimistic scenarios and with very frequent closure because of low threshold. So we have two implications of what we have observed so far. The first is that we have to consider short to medium term measures that should be developed to reduce the number of closures and maintain the infrastructure in its proper shape, I have to say. So a discussion about higher closure level combined with the local micro intervention in the city to protect the lower areas must be brought to the attention of decision makers and policy makers, I believe. And then if we look at the medium to long term, we have to consider other strategies that we can discuss if we have time and questions. And what we have to move is a perspective of adaptation pathways that we have to consider, where the MoSE is only one of the strategy that must be implemented for the long-term safeguarding of the city. So here is what I wanted to share with you. So I thank you for your attention. And here you can see the paper that we have recently published. Behnat, as she said, is one of the co-authors, but here I want to acknowledge also all the other co-authors that collaborated with us for the writing of this paper. Thank you again.
Thank you, Professor Giapponi. Thank you very much for this comprehensive presentation. And I wanted to take this time and say that, as you mentioned, it was really complicated model, but you touched very well in your presentation the important point of the paper. And thank you for leading this study. So now it's time for our audience to engage with you directly. We received some questions from our audience, and I want to start with one of those. The first one says, thank you for your insightful presentation. And I wanted to ask what motivated your research interest in the Venice flood protection system? And how did you approach studying its economic performance? Professor Giapponi, how would you like to address this question?
Well, we live in Venice and we work here, so the MoSE is a very important element of our life. It did change our everyday life by preserving the city by high water. But what is quite strange or shocking, if you like, is that there is really very little is known about all the details, and in particular the economics of this project, this infrastructure. So as I've mentioned, there is no official estimation of the operation cost. There is no official declaration about a maximum number, for example, of operations per year or in total. So this is why we thought that it would be important to build upon an extensive previous literature, trying to put everything together in a sense, and then putting all the studies together to build a sort of comprehensive model which compares the cost and the benefits for economic activities in the city, which I have mentioned that is also a subset of what we could study also in the future.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your response. So now we turn to another question, and it says the study highlights the potential impact of frequent MoSE closure on the lagoon ecosystem. Could you elaborate on the specific ecological consequences? How might these affect ecosystem services?
Okay, this is of course a big issue. I've mentioned before that we haven't, we haven't yet taken this issue into consideration. We are working on it, but again, with our surprise, we find a lack of systematic, transparent, shared information about all these issues. There is plenty of studies on the Venice Lagoon and even on the ecosystem services offered by the Venice Lagoon, but they are typically punctual studies. They are not applied to the whole system. They are maybe experimentally limited in time. So it's really very difficult to set up a comprehensive model that does something similar what we have done here. Plus, of course, you know that the monetary estimation of ecosystem service is per se a challenge that is can be accepted, debated, or there are many things that I can simply mention here. Indeed, one very important ecosystem service is what we call the blue carbon. The blue carbon is the amount of carbon that is stored in the ecosystem of the lagoon, in particular salt marshes and seagrasses. So here we are currently working, but again, probably the history of the MoSE is too short in time to let us understand really the dynamics of this phenomenon. I don't go into all the details, but the sequestration of carbon is due to the sedimentation and the creation of these salt marshes and the accumulation of biomass in the seagrasses. Well, we have only a few studies, unfortunately, trying to measure what is the effect of the MoSE on these phenomena. So the MoSE indeed may limit the deposition of sediments because it is activated during the storms. And these may have a negative effect on the accumulation of sediments and in turn on the accumulation of carbon, and therefore carbon sequestration, and therefore mitigation of climate change. So we are studying this. We are in contact with several colleagues working on this, and we are trying to systematize, in a sense, all these various sources of knowledge and try to develop a dynamic model, which will be indeed, in any case, affected with pretty high uncertainty, I'm afraid.
Yes, sure. Thank you. So we received different questions. I don't want to waste the time, so I jump to the other one. What measures or adaptation strategies could we adopt to increase the threshold closure? As about the closure.
Yeah, that is indeed a good point. What we are observing these days is that areas of the city that are below the threshold and are affected even when the MoSE is closed asked for lowering down this level, which would have, as you could see, dramatic consequences on the number of closures in the future. So in our opinion, we have to go to the opposite direction. So there are many adaptation strategies and measures for the city itself, raising the pavements, for example, setting some devices to protect the door along the streets and along the canals from relatively high tides. Of course, this will have some consequences in terms of costs and could complicate the life of some part of the city. But if we make an estimation of the cost associated to these micro interventions compared to the cost of MoSE activation and the benefits that we can get, including also the risk of reducing dramatically the time of operation of the MoSE, I'm pretty sure that there is a very strong basis to design this set of adaptation measures. More or less, it is protecting locally the buildings that are in fact affected even by relatively low high tides. So those that are in between 110 and 130, for example.
Okay. And another question from our audience that is asking, from your results, it seems that the port costs are relatively low compared to the city cost, even in the pessimistic scenario, which requires the closure of the lagoon for almost the entire year. How do you explain these results?
Well, the cost for the port are indeed ramping up in the future as the benefits for the city. Now we have to go into the details of the mechanism to explain this. Learning from the study that I mentioned, carried out by the Port Authority during the building of the MoSE, we implemented in our model this probabilistic, the probability, so to say, of no return, or the probability of abandoning in general the port of Venice. So the activity of the port is decreasing dynamically, and the costs are increasing, but still the order of magnitude is at least one order or two orders of magnitude lower than the benefits for the city. This does not mean that the port will survive. This is the important consideration that I try to make. So we are in the order of 1-2 billions, yes, indeed, but to be compared with 100. But still, the port could eventually disappear simply because even there there could be some discontinuities. So we know that from our model, theoretically, you have a 60% chance of entering the lagoon. But if you are the captain of the vessel and you look instead that you have a 40% probability that you will find the MoSE closed, either when you enter the lagoon, try to enter the lagoon, or when you try to exit the lagoon, maybe you will go to Ravenna, Trieste, or other ports that are close by in Italy, in Slovenia or Croatia. So this is indeed a big issue that requires a different kind of approach, which is not a micro solution. It is a macro solution that is under discussion these days, which is the offshore platform. So an offshore port connected with an infrastructure to the mainland, and therefore avoiding any sort of problem related to the MoSE.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this insightful response. So let's go to the next question that asks, does the increase in the MoSE activation threshold from 110 to 130 centimeters leads to additional cost? If so, do you take that into account in your analysis?
Well, according to the functioning of the model, but I think it has a logic. If you increase the activation level, of course, you decrease the operation cost, you decrease the negative impacts on the ports, but you increase the damages on the city. In particular, you increase the damages on buildings, because buildings are in fact affected by these tides. that reach the buildings and therefore ask for restoration of the buildings. In some cases, they damage what the contents of the buildings themselves. So this is where the damages and losses are expected to increase. But as I said before, we are convinced that with the micro adaptation interventions, we can protect most of the values exposed, still, of course, incurring in some replastering and other sort of cost for the buildings that are exposed. But again, through technological solutions and some traditional interventions that we have always implemented here in Venice to protect the ground floors, I think that a discussion about under 10, under 20, under 30 should be really taken seriously. And just to make another example, we are still investing in the protection of the city at 110 centimeters. These days, some important works are starting in the area of Cannaregio, for example, of the city. But my question is then, is it worth to keep investing on the protection at 110, or should we instead examine carefully if it would be much better maybe to raise up more than this, the pavements, for example, and see if we can do maybe with similar investments a protection to under 20 or under 30, and therefore save larger parts of the city if in the future we were obliged to limit the number of closures and therefore raising the thresholds.
Indeed, indeed. This is the challenging topics, and it still need more study and ongoing research. Thank you. And let's now have another question, which is asking about the. It says maybe it's our last question because of the time. Balancing economic gains with environmental impact can be challenging. How were trade-offs considered during the decision-making process for implementing the MoSE system? Were there alternative flood protection strategies evaluated?
Well, this is a very, very long story and a big question, in fact, that was raised today. The story of the MoSE system dates back to the 1980s, if not even before. So the MoSE was designed in a completely different world. For example, at the time when no consideration was made concerning the climate change. Later on, the MoSE has been reinterpreted, if you like, as also an adaptation measure, but it was not really designed as an adaptation measure. The consideration about sea level rise were not really in the original design. Indeed, everybody knows that the more we separate the lagoon from the sea, and the more we raise environmental problems. Now, the magnitude of this problem is what is uncertain. There is no doubt if we had, for example, to close the MoSE for, say, 50% of the time, there will be substantial problems, environmental problems. Think, for example, only at the case, at the fact that the sewage system of the city is very limited. It had to be redesigned in most of the part of the city. So the cleaning of the lagoon and the cleaning of the effluents from the sewage system is guaranteed by tides currently. So the huge amount of millions of cubic meters of water that enter every 6 hours, every 12 hours, and exit every 12 hours from the lagoon. If we stop this, everything will change. So this is a water quality issue that is evident, that becomes an ecological issue. I think also at the fact that we still have more than 20 little mouths of rivers So we have small rivers draining into the lagoon. If not for other reasons, if we had to close very, very frequently, the water of the lagoon will become more a fresh water, much more than a salt water or brackish water. So that is another issue. Not necessarily will have immediately negative consequences, but it will change dramatically the ecosystem. And all these things, unfortunately, have not been are not so clear. They have been studied, but we do not really have projections about these phenomena, depending on the function of the MoSE itself.
Okay, thank you. And our audience seems that they found your presentation really informative. Just the last question, would there be issues with sediment accumulation within the lagoon if closure become more frequent?
If what becomes more frequent, sorry, if?
Would there be issues with sediment accumulation within the lagoon if closures become more frequent?
Okay. Yes, that's what I tried to explain before. There are evidences showing that the fact that because of the effect of the MoSE, there is a lower effect of storms on the one side. Storms, of course, contribute substantially to suspending sediments and therefore activating the deposition of sediments. At the same time, we have an effect that is of the sedimentation that is that depends on the amount of water that is over these ecosystems. So again, the sea level rise on the one hand could contribute to increase the sedimentation, and so we could have a sort of parallel phenomenon with if the dynamic would be similar. Could be similar, we will have the sea level that raises, and at the same time also the salt marshes raising their average elevation, which would be beneficial for the environment because it will allow us to store more carbon. But the balancing between these various dynamics, the number of closures, the dynamics of sea level rise is rather unknown. So at the moment, we do not have simple answers to these. We know that these phenomena are indeed affected by all these drivers that we have studied, but a simple answer, to my knowledge, is yet not possible.
Okay, thank you. Interesting. Okay, so unfortunately, due to time constraint, we are not able to maybe address all of the questions. But we apologize if one question was not answered, but please know that we value your participation and interest. And we hope that you found today's webinar valuable and informative. Remember that the conversation doesn't have to end here. Please feel free to reach out if you have any further questions or would like to continue the discussion. So with this, I want to conclude today's session. Thanks again, Professor Carlo Giovanni, for your presentation. It was so informative. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. And we will look forward to seeing you at our future events. Have a good and wonderful day. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.